Before there was a World Wide Web, before browsers and domains, before e-commerce and .com, there were researchers and educators in the early 80s who took a single idea called ARPANET and built it into what would become the most powerful communications tool in history. In 1985, a handful of faculty and staff at Cornell, Rochester, RPI, and elsewhere in New York began constructing a regional network of computers throughout the state. Called PSINet, it was up and running by late fall of '86. The business world quickly took note of the Internet, begun as the ARPANET research project, and the network was soon in high demand by corporate America. The visionaries behind PSINet responded, forming a small for-profit ISP. 10 years later, it is known around the world as PSINet, the Internet Supercarrier. It was December of 1989 when Performance Systems International was born in Troy, New York. A small band of Internet pioneers, realizing the potential of a much larger commercial network, crafted a plan that would eventually connect all corners of the world.
The PSINet founders, principally Bill, sort of stood up in the Internet community, which in those days could be held in one room, and announced that the commercialization and privatization of the Internet was the direction that people ought to be looking forward to.
The first day of business for PSINet was January 1, 1990, and we all had to work. There was 15 or 20 of us. We sort of picked that day to start the company, start fresh. I believe that it set the tone for the next 10 years of the corporate culture, the dedication and the passion of our effort of trying to bring the Internet to the people.
Fueled only by their enthusiasm and what little startup money came from family and friends, PSINet quickly added another link to what would eventually become a long chain of firsts by building the world's first national network.
And we got a T1 cross-country, very high speed at the time, and hooking up one pop in San Francisco back to DC, and that was a nationwide network.
PSINet faced marketing and sales challenges far greater than most companies. They weren't just growing a business, they were inventing an industry.
It was funny because I would say, I work for an internet service provider, and they'd go, "What's that?"
The challenge was trying to explain to people why you needed internet, why internet was a big thing, going to be a big thing.
By 1991, the National Science Foundation, an early funder of the Internet, lifted all restrictions on commercial use of the network. PSINet responded by introducing dial-up IP services, allowing greater access for even more business customers. The company was growing fast, and to reward the staff for their successes, PSINet devised a plan which set a precedent in the technology industry.
Then came along stock options. We were like, stock options? They said, yeah, someday it's going to be worth money. Okay, so we threw them away in the drawer and just kept working.
Their hard work finally caught the eyes of outside investors, and the influx of cash fed further expansion and improvements. By 1993, the bandwidth of the network backbone increased for the third time in as many years.
Back in 1988, when I first joined, we were a 56K backbone. And then we went to T1 in 1993, we went to T3, and that was a big deal. Everyone had t-shirts that said T3 in 93.
While the network across the United States was growing, companies doing international business began calling for a way to connect their offices around the world. In 1994, PSINet's first international acquisition made it happen.
The interesting story about PSINet Japan is that we had a point of presence, or a POP, that was located in our shower. Actually, it was there when we bought the company. I didn't put it there. And we had a Cisco in there, and we had a terminal server, and we had a Sun Microsystems box in there, and a big sign saying, "Don't turn the shower on."
Performance Systems International, PSI International was the name of the company when we started. There's no US, there's no America as in online. There's no specific geographic limitation.
By the mid-90s, the Internet was changing the world. The way information was gathered and disseminated, the way products were bought and sold, the way the world communicated. PSINet was a catalyst of that change, and the result marked one of its greatest milestones to date. On May 2, 1995, PSINet began publicly trading on the NASDAQ stock market.
I remember Schrader coming to us over the course of the first few years telling us that he was going to create a big tax problem for all of us. And we had no idea what he was talking about. Well, as we got to the IPO, we kind of realized the value of what we had done.
I think everyone knew back in 1995 that the course we were charting for the company would be the one that leads us to where we are today, being a major global player.
It was June of 1996 when PSINet decided to concentrate its energy on providing internet services solely to business accounts. Consumer customers were sold to Mindspring, at that time a startup Atlanta-based ISP. Within a year, an agreement for dark fiber was made with IXC Communications that gave PSINet customers access to fiber lines 50 times faster than typical internet backbones. The agreement made PSINet the only independent facilities-based internet service provider in the world.
Again, PSINet on the bleeding edge of technology, the first company to ever do that, the first company to own their own bandwidth, own their own fiber. It was a trendsetter.
By 1998, investors were hooked on PSINet. In the first half of the year, the company raised over $1.5 billion. Once considered a risk by the investment community, PSINet was relabeled a good investment. By the fall of that same year, a dramatic expansion and improvement in customer services was announced.
We opened up our brand spanking new hosting facility in Herndon, Virginia. I think one evolution that we've made as a company, and one impressive evolution, was the time when we started doing managed services, co-location services, and web hosting services.
By managing their own facilities, PSINet guaranteed its customers dedicated service running on the PSINet backbone, and plans were already being laid to open several more hosting facilities worldwide.
I come to work each day working very hard to be the least technical among us. And the reason for that is that it's not about the technology. It really is about the solutions for customers that the technology enables.
As the company entered its 10th year in 1999, PSINet's growth was reflecting the exponential growth of the Internet. In January alone, the company reached 3 major milestones. In its largest marketing effort ever, PSINet bought the naming rights to the NFL's Baltimore Ravens football stadium. The branding campaign brought the PSINet name to millions.
The publicity does nothing but offer a great big advantage.
Also in January, PSINet stock exceeded the valuation promised to IXC in the 1997 fiber deal. That landmark eliminated the threat of partial ownership by an outside interest. And before the month concluded, PSINet acquired the Flag fiber ring, completing its network around the globe.
We are now considered one of the top carriers in the world. Something that when we started, we haven't even been in the same space as an AT&T, a Sprint, Cable and Wireless, British Telecom. The name of PSINet now can be put right alongside those companies.
When I started, the org chart was 1 page. It's now a book.
1999 also saw impressive financial milestones for the company. After its share price reached an all-time high in April, PSINet announced in July that it was EBITDA positive for the first time in its history.
I think people in this industry are very surprised at us. I think back in the very beginning when we started, who was PSINet? Don't worry about them. They'll go away. But we didn't. We were persistent.
As the world enters the new millennium, PSINet continues its exponential growth with more than 800 POPs in more than 22 countries on 5 continents. PSINet is a model of success in a volatile industry, a success attributed to one thing.
People, PSINet people. It's our family. And the reason that it's so critical is that the people design and build and maintain the network. The people design, build, and maintain the products. So you get the best network architecture, you get the best products, you get the best customer base in the world. All of it focuses back on the people. And so all of the people in the PSINet family worldwide are the essential ingredient. That is the center point of this company. In fact, it is the center point of the Internet.
PSINet. In 10 years, a vision brought to life, a potential realized, yet ever growing. An international family committed to excellence and service into the new millennium and beyond. PSINet, the Internet super carrier.